Hello and welcome to Uzreport World News, and my name is Bahram Gafarov. Uzbekistan has expressed its serious concern about the aggravation of the situation in East Jerusalem. It urged the parties to immediately stop violent actions, refrain from escalating the situation and prevent further bloodshed, and take all necessary measures to resolve the conflict by political and diplomatic means. The press secretary of the president, Sherzod Asadov, has delivered government's message on this occasion on Monday. Uzbekistan is of course worried about the sharp turning of the events in Jerusalem. It's necessary to take advantage of all means to stop the bloodshed. Besides, the enactments of the sacred places as the Mosque, Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem should be provided and returned to status quo. Generally speaking, the Palestine and Israel events need to be solved with international normative law, the UN resolutions and two-state approach, which has been encouraged for many years. Meanwhile, Israel bombed what it said were underground tunnels used by Hamas and Palestinian militants, fired rocket barrages at Israeli cities as fighting spilled into a second week on Monday, amid mounting international calls for a ceasefire. Early on Sunday, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate end to fighting at the Security Council's first public meeting on the conflict.
Israeli artillery were fired on Gaza Monday morning as hostilities entered a second week. Overnight, Israel launched dozens of airstrikes on Gaza and the Hamas Islamists who rule the strip where 2 million Palestinians live. The sound of explosions roared as dozens of fighter jets bombed what Israel said were underground tunnels used by Hamas. Meanwhile, militants in the Palestinian enclave fired rockets at the southern Israeli cities of Beersheba and Ashkelon. Israeli aircraft struck 9 residences belonging to high-ranking Hamas commanders, the military said. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel's campaign in Gaza was continuing at full force and that deterrence had to be achieved to prevent future conflict with Hamas. US President Joe Biden said his administration was working with all parties to achieve sustained calm.
We also believe Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live in safety and security and enjoy equal measure of freedom, prosperity, and democracy.
Yet there's no sign of an end to hostilities, despite international calls for a ceasefire. It follows a crescendo of global concern over the weekend after an Israeli airstrike in Gaza destroyed several homes, killing 42 people, including 10 children.
Uzbekistan set diplomatic relations with Dominica, and it is the 137th country. The signing of a joint communiqué took place in New York. The document was signed by the permanent representative of Uzbekistan to the UN, Ambassador Bakhtiar Ibragimov, and the permanent representative of Dominica to the UN, Ambassador Lauren Bannis-Roberts. The Commonwealth of Dominica is an island nation in the Eastern Caribbean. The area of the country is 751 square kilometers. The population is about 70,000 people. Dominica is a full member of the UN and is also a member of the Commonwealth of Nations, the Caribbean Community, the Caribbean Common Market and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. The parties confirmed their mutual interest in strengthening joint work within the framework of international organizations, including the UN structure. 2 more Uzbek citizens died of COVID-19 on Sunday. The number of new infected cases comprised over 200 people, bringing the total number to nearly 96,900. The death toll reached 670. The country has vaccinated over 1.5 million people since April the 1st with Uzbek Chinese, AstraZeneca and Sputnik V vaccines. A fire that broke out in the Tuscan Botanical Garden on May 16 could have destroyed dozens of valuable trees if not the timely response of the Ministry of Emergency. An open area at the back of the garden caught fire at noon, the ministry said in a statement. The fire and rescue brigade managed to prevent the spread of fire to the forest fund areas in a timely manner. Thus, the trees of the garden were not affected by the fire. The causes of the incident are being investigated. No injuries have been reported.
Coronavirus patients are lying in the open outside hospitals in Nepal, gasping for oxygen. While on a Kathmandu riverbank, dead bodies are being cremated in open air. The Red Cross says this South Asian country is heading toward a human catastrophe if no action is taken soon. It is scrambling to contain a fresh wave of infections that has spilled across the border with India. That's where a new variant of the virus first emerged. This strain has now spread throughout Nepal as well. It sparked a surge in the country's infections, recording 57 times as many cases as a month ago. The Red Cross says nearly half of coronavirus tests are coming back positive. The surge has led to a shortage of hospital beds, medical supplies, and oxygen. Overcrowded hospitals in capital city Kathmandu say they are unable to take new patients who await treatment on the floor, in hallways, or even outside. Meanwhile, the death toll continues to rise, forcing city officials to create space on a riverbank to cremate a flow of bodies. The crematorium near the city's largest Hindu temple has been overflowing with families of the dead.
The Australian government is refusing to relent on its decision to keep the country's border closed to almost all international travel until the middle of next year. A decision that's drawing increased criticism from business and industry groups, as well as members of the Prime Minister's own party. Most flights have been for Australians returning from abroad. About 9,000 are trying to return from India alone. But the first flight back on Saturday was half empty because so many had tested positive. This was Prime Minister Scott Morrison's response.
I've seen the suggestion from others who seem to think we can put people who have tested COVID positive on planes and bring them to Australia. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. And we all want to support people as much as we can, but by importing COVID into the country, I don't think that's a very sensible or sound thing to do. This sort of testing is required from all places where people are coming from into Australia, whether it's in the UK or elsewhere. And of course, it's important in India, and we've seen those high testing rates. And that's frankly why we took the action we did, because the risk was very, very high.
Australia's had one of the world's most successful efforts at fighting the disease, about 900 deaths and only 30,000 confirmed infections since the start of the pandemic. It's credited its border closure, swift contract tracing, and the public's compliance with social distancing measures. It also has a travel bubble with New Zealand, which also has very low infection rates.
Tapping away at the computer keyboard and sitting for hours in the office chair. It's an image familiar to many, but the norm of working long hours is killing hundreds of thousands of people every year. That's according to the World Health Organization, which warned Monday that longer working hours is a worsening trend that may have intensified during the pandemic. In the first global study of deaths associated with longer working hours, around 745,000 people died from stroke and heart disease associated with longer working hours. WHO Technical Officer Frank Pegger explains.
We have some evidence that shows that when countries go into national lockdown, the numbers of hours work increased by about 10%. We also have coming about through the economic crisis and people working home, we have a digitization, right? A sort of massive increase in digitization of work. And digitization of work might actually make it harder to disconnect.
The study, produced by WHO and the International Labour Organization, focused on 15 countries in 2 regions. Data showed that most of the victims were men and were middle-aged or older. People living in Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific region, including China, Japan and Australia, were the most affected. WHO recommended the need for capping work hours to increase worker productivity and protect workers' health.
Britain will treble its tree planting rates over the next 3 years to help reach its target of net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and combat climate change. George Eustice, UK Environment Secretary, is set to announce that more than 17,000 acres of woodlands will be planted per year. His statement read, "We will make sure that the right trees are planted in the right places and that more green jobs are created in the forestry sector. But it gave no other details regarding how many trees would be planted or where, or how much the planting scheme would cost, or how it would be funded. The statement also did not give a comparison figure for how many acres of woodland had been planted previously. Britain is due to host the COP26 conference in Glasgow in November. The UK government said it was focused on 4 goals: securing global net zero, protecting communities and natural habitats from the impacts of climate change, mobilising finance, and nations working together to accelerate action.
This is the critical fight for all of us.
Britain's climate czar and COP26 President Alok Sharma warned that world leaders must agree to end coal use at the November summit to prevent a climate catastrophe.
Human activity is damaging our Earth. It's imperiling this brilliant jewel. The greenhouse gases that we've been pumping into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution are altering nature's precious balance, disrupting the finely tuned and fantastically complex system that is the world's climate.
Bitcoin hit a 3-month low on Monday before regaining some ground. In a wild trading session, investors initially sold and then bought cryptocurrencies. That's in the wake of Tesla boss Elon Musk's latest tweets about the carmaker's Bitcoin holdings. In one, Musk said Tesla has not sold any Bitcoin, but that came after weekend tweets which hinted Tesla is considering or may have already sold some of its massive holdings. Musk's enthusiasm has boosted crypto markets, but he has lately roiled trade by appearing to cool on Bitcoin in favour of its one-time parody Dogecoin. Bitcoin fell more than 9% on Monday to its lowest since February 8, but then rallied more than 5%. Dogecoin fell nearly 7% and is yet to fully recover from Musk describing it as a hustle on Saturday Night Live. Although he did boost the price last week by saying he was working to improve its efficiency. Last Wednesday, Musk said Tesla would stop taking Bitcoin as payment for Tesla cars due to environmental concerns. The virtual currency has lost almost a quarter of its value since that announcement.
Ryanair posted a record annual loss on Monday. Europe's biggest budget airline saw a deficit of $989 million. That after travel restrictions forced it to scrap over 80% of its flights. Ryanair flew just 27.5 million passengers over the year to the end of March. That compares with 149 million the year before. The airline called the past 12 months the most challenging in its history. Now Ryanair says it's still impossible to give a formal profit outlook for the coming period, but it said it cautiously believed it could hit break-even if there was continued progress in tackling the health crisis. Group Chief Executive Michael O'Leary says there are signs that a recovery has begun. He says weekly bookings have trebled since early April. Ryanair is also unhappy with its jet supplier, Boeing. It has faced long delays getting the 737 MAX planes that it ordered. O'Leary says the US giant has now promised the first one will be delivered in late May. But he says he does not necessarily believe Boeing after a series of missed deadlines.
So far, these have been the latest news for today. Goodbye. Take care.